Hi, this is Darren Drew from D. Drew Guitars. Today I'm going to show you if you want to build a guitar from scratch at home, which is raw boards like I do, you'll need various things. First, you need to figure out what type of guitar you would like. Actually, for a solid body electric guitar, the wood material makes a big difference. I like mahogany cores. Because it's nice and mellow sounding. If you do like swamp ash or alder, it's going to be a little bit brighter. It's going to be heavier, harder to work with. So I like mahogany core, and then I'll do like a nice wood, maple. This is maple, quilted maple, that I'll do for the cap on the front and back side so it matches. So what you would first want to do is figure out the style of guitar you want. There's a lot of like 24 frets. There's, scale length is a major thing with your guitar. So you want to figure out which scale length you like or prefer. I like the Gibson scale length, 24 and 3/4 or 12 and 3/4. It's 22 fret, and you need to decide what type of fretboard material you want. If there's rosewood, there's ebony. This one here I'm doing with maple. It needs a clear lacquer over the top of that. I prefer like a mahogany body, maple top and back, because that can be some really pretty wood. I like a maple neck also, because it does add a little bit of brightness and crispness to the tone. Fretboard makes a little bit of a difference, but not all that much really. So, to begin with, you would need to figure all that, the type of woods you want first. And then you would make a template like this, draw it out on your wood, depending on the wood choices you get for how wide or how thick. I like going with an inch thick here, because then by the time I get my cap on the front and back, it's going to be a thinner guitar than a Strat, which I like that. They're lighter, smaller, easier to play, more comfortable, and then you need to go on to consider, like what type of bridges you like. This here is a hip shot bridge, string through the body. I like that because it gives the best vibration through the body from the strings. You can also intonate each string separately and raise or lower the height separately per string. So you need to know that before you start, doing your these are my pickup routes. Before you start routing, your wood, I'll leave it a full blank or full thing like this until I route my neck pickup here, where the neck is going to insert into there. And then as far as tools, I started out with very few. One of the most tools you're going to need is like a palm sander, a router, a drill, things of that sort. Pencils, I like mechanical pencils. You're going to go through different varieties of rulers, screwdrivers, of course, blades, some squares. But I like this type of a router because I can change my bases on it from a big bass to a small bass. You would also need, and please don't let me scare you with all this stuff that you would need, but it really helps. You would need clamps like this for gluing like the tops on, and you need many of them. I put on as many as I can possibly get on every glue joint and tighten them very tight. You need different grits of sandpaper. You need like a miter saw, which they sell these already pre-made and stuff. And then there's some more clamps. Those there are clamping blocks. So when you put your clamps on, it's not going to go into the wood itself. You're going to have to make a clamp block for each piece that you glue together. So you're going to need a various of hand tools, you could say. It really helps if you have a table saw. I got this table saw free on Craigslist. So you can get tools cheap if you look for them. Another thing that you're definitely going to need though is chop saw. This I bought brand new, but and then a tabletop belt sander really helps. This is a tabletop joiner, which really helps for making your cuts nice and flat, square, with a 90-degree corner. You know, spindle sanders really help, but those I have never had until here just lately. You know, a drill press that I got for $20. I got this, Craftsman bandsaw for free. You know, but you definitely need like these tools here. It really helps if you have like a thickness sander. These are quite expensive, but they really help. But I made first dozen guitars or so without one. Some router bits. You're going to need some drill bits. A drill. But you need to figure out what type of guitar you want before you even start. The woods that you want to use and things like that. Which type of, for a Strat type guitar, you need thicker body, for it, like I said before. But it's all, you need to figure out all of that stuff before you even really get started on building one from scratch. There's a lot of kits out there, and people say, oh, this is my first build, but no, you just assembled a bunch of parts. You're not cutting it out of raw boards. This stuff, my approach is I like doing it by hand in my garage at home, and I really build a guitar because I buy raw boards to start out with. Nothing is like pre-shaped, pre anything. And so I kind of get offended when people say, "Oh, I built this," but no, it was a kit. You just assembled the parts because all the routes are done, everything is done for you. That's not building it; that's assembling it. But anyway, so this is the first approach you need to do if you're going to build one from scratch. With raw boards, and I'll tell you, it's so much more fulfilling building a badass guitar when you build it all, one of a kind type thing. And there's no more satisfaction in when you're playing it and it plays real nice, it sounds nice, it looks real nice, it feels real nice. But anyway, this is like part one of building a guitar at home. And don't let all these tools or whatever scare you, because I accumulated them slowly, and so, have fun, good luck, and I hope you build well. Keep all your fingers. Anyway, this is Darren Drew saying, please like, please subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.